journey takes us to the point where consciousness reveals the awareness of who we are. This precipice of awareness guides our path of revelation through contact, interaction, and disclosure. We are on the threshold of evolutionary realizations, technologies, and awareness of our place in the universe. We are the phenomena. Welcome to MUFON Contact Radio with your host, Richard Banasak.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I really appreciate that you all, take your time to come and visit us and see what we're doing here. But again, this is MUFON Contact Radio Show on the precipice of awareness. And I am your host, Richard Banasak. And as always, we are the phenomenon. So, this episode, we're going to feature a MUFON investigated 1978 UFO flap near the border of California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. It's a small flap, but its central key ultimately is, as you'll see, an abduction case that I was blessed enough to be a part of, and we'll go into that as we go on. But also, we will look at another interesting UFO video. Again, there's some incredible ones out there, and I think you'll really like this because we're also going to review a very short science paper out of Ukraine where they investigated large UFOs near the moon, which I think is fascinating. And then we're going to talk just a bit about the Nazca geoglyphs, petroglyphs, again, signs, symbols, and things that I think are significant. But as we go forward, what I'd like for us to all remember is we have so many things of interest. So this first thing that I'd like to bring up is that particular thing that I'd like to add to our continued view is this idea of all the videos that are on the different platforms. This one is a video of interest, and you'll see here these are stills from the video. Obviously, this comes from a Chinese, and some of you may have seen it. If not, I think it's cool. It's from 2022 of a giant spacecraft that was viewed above the moon. Obviously, it's relevant today due to the academic paper that I was speaking about from the Ukrainian astronomers analyzing films of UFO that estimated to be, holy moly, very long, miles long. So anyway, let's take a second here, and I want to view this. And once it starts, I'm just going to mute the sound. Here we go.
Se trata sin la menor duda de uno de los videos más espectaculares que se han registrado en la investigación de este fenómeno, que demuestra la presencia de naves de origen no humano, desplazándose muy cerca de la superficie lunar. Observemos una vez más. De acuerdo a la información en redes sociales de China, este avistamiento fue registrado el 29 de septiembre del 2022 por un testigo desconocido en esta misma nación, y que asimismo no tenía ninguna intención de grabar ovnis. Este visitante apareció de manera fortuita en el ángulo superior izquierdo y quedó registrado gracias a que el autor estaba utilizando una cámara P1000 de la marca Nikon con un lente de 3000 milímetros, lo que le permitió grabar con enorme nitidez el paso de este disco muy cerca de la superficie de nuestro satélite natural. Un evento pocas veces documentado en la historia, ya que, en esta ocasión, no fue un telescopio, sino una cámara profesional de largo alcance, la que grabó con alta definición este evento extraordinario. Incluso, usted mismo, en circunstancias similares, podría convertirse en testigo de un evento muy importante, como este. Es difícil determinar exactamente a qué distancia se encontraba de la Luna este dispositivo de origen no humano. Sin embargo, no queda la menor duda de que esta estructura era de dimensiones considerables. Tomando como referencia el diámetro de nuestro satélite natural, que es de 3.474 kilómetros, se puede estimar que este misterioso disco se movía a una velocidad aproximada de 300 kilómetros por segundo. El sitio de internet de China que divulgó este video señaló que
As I said, and again, this is something that is pretty significant, as you'll see there. These pictures, still pictures, are pretty cool. But wow, huge videos. I'm sorry, UFOs in relationship to where we're seeing them, and then how they were able to capture them in the moon. And so and it leads really naturally into the paper that I want to discuss with you, Paul. And this is just our paper of interest. And I want to make sure that we share this because this is called the UFO on the Moon, and it is by as I said before, the people in the Ukrainian. I guess it's the main astronomical observatory in Ukraine there, and I have to apologize. The authors, Boris Shilofik and Vladimir, whoever he is, and I have to apologize to those, and then Sergey, whoever. But anyway, the claims in this particular paper, it's a very short paper, is their core claims is that they were able to, in a high-speed video observations near the moon, revealed more than 20 unidentified objects. And then they classified these objects into two categories. One was called an atmospheric UFOs, stationary, appearing to move in sync with the moon. But the other one was these continental UFOs, large moving objects. Again, just amazing, I guess, in terms of size. And what you saw in the video is just some of those. So the key findings, just really quickly, because the paper is astonishing. It's not very far. So so they were able to do this detection and observation method, and this all occurred, as the paper says, September 7th, 2025. So it's really fresh, done paper, recently uploaded. And what it found, and again, these atmospheric UFOs were stationary, relative to the moon's motion. There's a synchronistic brightness to them, which is incredible. The range of the objects were hundreds of meters to several kilometers, and we're going to talk about a little bit about that, what that means. Those were the atmospheric ones. The continental ones, same. They move along and across the lunar surface. Their speeds, besides, just the side, their speeds, were 24,000 miles an hour. I'm sorry, their speed was 43,000 miles an hour. Their size was like almost 25 miles long. And I thought, wow, how the heck were they able to even picture those? But what I did here is, and you'll see it, this next one, is these in this paper, there's a couple here that show that one picture that's on the left there is actually a still from the paper, and the other one is one of those stills blown up to show its relative size. And what you're seeing here in relationship to the paper is you're seeing this idea of just the different effects, the camouflage and detection difficulty that they were able to at least determine based on when they did the paper. They're very bright, but however, they were so camouflaged into the background or with the moon that sometimes they were almost indistinguishable, and which relates to their ability to be blended in. The size calculation, as I said, of these particular objects were just huge. The other thing that I thought was pretty interesting, and you'll see here in this last part here, and these are the overall interpretations. they argued that that the detected objects were extremely large, hundreds of meters, obviously, extremely fast, as I've told you, up to 43,000 miles. They were synchronized in a brightness which was consistent with each other. They were camouflaged, and they were unprecedented in both sides. And of course, the idea is what does this represent? And obviously, the observation analysis claiming the detection of anomalous objects near the moon using this high-speed imagery. The the authors, because of what they were able to find, adds to another level of, where we are in terms of what we're discovering, the forefront of science, the way that this subject is more mainstream, and the evidence, again, continues to stack up that what we're trying to share with others, what we're trying to illuminate, if you will, is this is real. Who we are is not what we have been either believed, told, taught, and that we need to expand our perception and mind about things. So in addition to that, I just want to spend a couple of minutes on this. And, last episode and other episodes, I talk about semiotics and symbols and geographs and petroglyphs and signs and symbols that are used throughout the universe. But anyway, the Nazca lines, a lot of people don't know this about the last Nazca lines. Besides them having a bunch of petroglyphs of animals and butterflies and flowers and these different shapes, they have these sign and symbol petroglyphs. And as this one shows you here, this is actually a picture of a large petroglyph that I want to talk about. And as you'll notice, and we're going to get a little bit of a close-up here in a second, but as you'll notice here in the center, it's a large circle, and it's got some rectangles and squares. This is a little bit of close-up from the side of it. But the Nazca lines, as everybody knows, these are the ancient geoglyphs located in the Nazca Desert in southern Peru. Obviously, no one has proof as to who built them or created them or what their function was. The glyphs depict living creatures in a lot of cases, stylizing some plants, imaginary beings, as well as geometric figures, several kilometers long. Perhaps the most interesting than the figures of the animals, and this is where I'm going today, are these zigzag lines, and in what they've created, which is what is known in the larger world as mandalas. And so, the idea of these mandalas, and just to give you an idea, mandalas are circular designs symbolizing the notion that life is a never-ending thing. The Hindus were one of the first people to use mandalas as a spiritual tool. But the mandalas most individuals are familiar with are the ones made by the Buddhists, which, again, circular, these geometric shapes, colors, the meaning of the mandalas, and that's the interesting thing. And I think that the ones in the Nazca, which represents this, and you're going to see this here, the meaning comes from the Sanskrit, which means circle. Even though it may be dominated by squares or triangles, a mandala has a concentric structure. Just like most geometry, sacred geometry, it's very complex. And when we say that, sacred or complex geometry, I think it really has to do with what we represent as two-dimensional, three-dimensional, four-dimensional, five-dimensional, six-dimensional, and the idea that we're more than just what we see. There's a lot more to who we are and to our energy, almost in a more of a realm, dimensional setting. And I think that that's part of maybe what these signs and symbols and mandalas are trying to create, both in the physical sense and in this particular case also what you would say a religious, spiritual sense or esoteric sense. Anyway, the basic form of most mandalas is a square with four gates, and then it contains a circle with a center point. Each gate is the general shape of a T, and you can see here, and we're going to get it. Mandalas are often exhibit this radial balance, which is, I think, has to do with what represents who we are. Now, this picture here on my left is the one I just showed you that was created in Nazca in the original of the previous slides. And this is the mandala that is usually consistent with what we see in the Sanskrit or Hindus. But you can see as it's colored, and that's what it's used, it has that particular feature. And I thought, that those are pretty cool things. So what do they mean? Besides, this image appears to have been carved with exceptional precision, which is incredible. The large squares measure 180 feet across, while the inner circles span the same diameter. Several smaller squares, about 20 feet wide, appear to have been etched in the landscape, along with an assortment of strategically placed holes. Mandala is a spiritual and ritual symbol in India and in Indian religions, representing the universe. And they represent wholeness or a cosmic diagram. And I think that's where I'm going. This idea, and again, I'd like to just share this idea about these mandalas. I believe that they were created, and when you see them, like everything that we have in our lives, sometimes you don't get it, or sometimes your view of things don't allow you to see it. And I think what they're seeing is, and what they're sharing with us, is that we are more than what we realize. And then that's the beauty of what this program is about, is that we're trying to just illuminate, journey as to who we really are. So very cool. Get a chance. There's a lot of them in Nazca lines, as there in all over obviously our world. So the feature for this particular episode is a flap series of cases, and there's about 3 of them. And they come from, I'm going to move this over a little bit so you can see it from the side, but they come from our MUFON files. And it represents just a series of reports and investigations of a flap in 1978 near the borders of California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. And the reason why I picked this is because one of the very first abduction cases I did was called the Jack Rabbit Abduction Enigma. And that happened in 1978. And it involved 2 ladies, one who just got out of the service, Susan Alloway Ware, and her friend Karen, and their trip across the country. And obviously, during the course of the beginning parts of that trip, they had a sighting, which we're going to talk a little bit about, and they were abducted. And then, of course, years later, the revelation occurred. But in investigating that particular case, I found some other corroborating, which is very important when you do any kind of search for truth or investigation or scientific study. You want evidence, and you want other forms of evidence to sort of bring corroboration or to what you're looking at. So in this particular case, what I did is I, in investigating and continuing to research this case, I went into our database and other databases and found, and as you see here, that during that particular time in 1978, in September, and that's the month that we're talking about, there was 31 total reports sighting reports that we, MUFON, received during the course up to this point involving that particular time. 6 reports were along the trip area of what you're going to see these 3 cases, including our abduction case. And 8, of course, are around the same time, which is very significant. And you'll see where I'm going with this, because it's important and significant, because there's so many of these cases, and in this particular incidents, these 3 cases, I would venture to say there's at least there's probably at least anywhere from 6 to 10 people who are part of what happened. And in the course of doing this investigation, we have 4 witnesses who came forward in the total of these cases. Again, multiple witnesses bringing credibility to what we believe was occurring around that time. So this first case involves multiple travelers who witnessed a large UFO. It was received from MUFON in January 2011 It references the date of occurrence as September 11th, 9/11, but in 1978. It's in the area of St. George, Utah, and the person who reported it was a guy who was traveling, and you're going to see her alone en route. And then, of course, the disposition for the person, the investigator who took it, which was not me. I took the third case, which is the abduction case. But when I looked back and I do my background, I found these cases that I'm telling you now because they have relevance, and you'll see where I'm going with that. So anyway, let's get going into this case because I think it's relatively interesting. So the case summary that you'll see here, this occurred near St. George, Utah on September 11, 1978 at around 8:10 a.m. in the morning. While traveling east on I-15 from Los Angeles towards Davenport, Iowa, the reporting witness observed a large, perfectly spherical silver gray translucent orb hovering motionless above about 30 to 50 feet above the ground. The object was estimated to be about 100 to 200 feet in diameter, so it was a pretty big object. And it was approximately 300 to 400 feet from the stopped vehicles. And I say stopped vehicles because our witness reported that it wasn't only him who saw it. There was many vehicles because they all stopped. The witness reported that it was clear weather, no sound, which is important, no visible markings, lights on the particular object, windows, portals, or propulsion, none of that. There was nothing that he could see. He said several other witnesses appeared to observe the object as well. They stopped. They were all stopped. As a matter of fact, many of them exited their vehicles. And as our witness said, they watched it, whatever it was, roughly for 1 minute before it abruptly blinked out, which is a common term that happens. All of a sudden it's there and bam, it's gone. How, where it goes, I don't know. It disappeared. Obviously, like I said, when we checked the weather conditions, there was no issues or anything that could have naturally or in terms of atmospherically, in terms of weather, caused that. So one of the things I did as we went here, I wanted to sort of isolate the behavior of the object itself. It was motionless, hovering 30 to 50 feet above the ground. It appeared to be floating or hanging in midair without any visible support. It made no sound. It showed no visible means of propulsion. Obviously, these are all what we would constitute those observables that are important as it relates to what we are calling UFO, UAP. It remained stationary, again, while the witnesses watched it for about a minute. And then again, like I said, it abruptly blinked out. There's no traces of the object when it took off. So what I did is like I like to do, I asked AI, based on the witness's testimony only, nothing that I added, create what the witnesses says he saw. As you see here, this is the terrain around St. George, Utah, Southwest United States. There was all these cars that he had mentioned in the larger body of the report had pulled over to the side. In that time of in 1978, the 4-lane in terms of I-15, and then 73, I think it goes over to Colorado, east to west, was just a 2-lane highway and one way. And then, of course, the other direction had it somewhere over. But this is what they saw, and this is what was representative. So I thought that was a pretty cool thing. And this has happened on the 11th of September, 1978. Now, the other thing that the witness said, there was a number of strange effects related to this particular case. The object appeared to be translucent, but not transparent. So it wasn't. It sort of, again, we get this. Was it there or was it not? But it was solid enough to obviously have what it appeared in terms of its shimmering reflection. It had no sound, which was incredible, and we see that consistent with others. No propulsion was visible, like I told you, blinked out. No traces remained afterwards. This is where I get the multiple witnesses reportedly reacted the same way. They looked one at one another, and this is what the witness said. They sort of what they were seeing, and when it happened, after it happened, they started looking at each other like, and again, nobody said anything, and they were shrugging, and they weren't sure what it was. But the interesting thing is they all got back in their vehicles without talking or saying anything. No one exchanged names, numbers, discussed the event. They just took off. Again, this whole state I've talked about of I don't know if it was the Oz effect, the altered state that the sighting occurred. Maybe it was the trauma that they of unbelief. Anyway, the witness noted that the object seemed so unusual that if it had not been so large, obviously, it might have been sort of what he thought was a hologram, which I thought was a pretty interesting comment from him. So that's a very interesting case. And the reason why I share that case with you, because this is part of the investigation as to what was occurring around this part of the southwest of the United States, which is southern Nevada, eastern part, eastern California, but the south part, you got Utah, and then of course you got the northwest part of Arizona, all that little small area, not near the Four Corners, but obviously over towards California. And this was happening within a 4-day period. And there was a number of, like I said, cases. But this next case happened on the same day that the case that I later investigated that involved an abduction case. It happened on that same day. Now, the time for this case and the abduction case, it's negotiable because, I mean, did one happen or did the other one happen? I don't know. But this one happened in La Paz County, Arizona. Now, the 15, which leads, through Las Vegas and goes into Utah, and this 95 leads all the way up past Needles and goes and runs into the 15. So they converge in that same area. But we received this one, the person who investigated this, in August of 2013. Again, this happened September 15th, 1978. And it occurred along 95, US 95, Highway 95, which runs north to south in the La Paz County, Arizona. And again, it can go all the way down. The 95 runs all the way down to the border of Mexico, and it's next to the eastern border of California and Arizona. So it's right in that particular area. 2 people were traveling in a car. It was at nighttime, and you're going to see that the investigator who determined it to be unknown. All right, so let's get into the narrative and the case summary of this particular incident. Now, this occurred around the 15th, as it said, of 1978, September 15th. It was around midnight when the witnesses, and there was 2 of them, they were traveling on U.S. Highway 95 in the La Paz County, north of Yuma. So they were just north of Yuma at the time. Yuma's at the bottom of Arizona, next to California and the Mexico border. The witness stated that a silent disc-shaped object flew alongside her Lincoln Continental, as she was driving. So all of a sudden, they're heading north on 95 from Yuma. The object that she described was larger than the vehicle, had large lights or window-like features, and it maintained a position next to the car while the utility poles stood behind at a distance from the roadway. So as they're driving, it was on that side, the passenger side of the car, and there was utility poles, and it just flew and followed as they were traveling northbound. Probably pretty scary. The passenger, there was another female who was the passenger in the vehicle. The witness who reported it said the passenger was present, and reportedly this passenger, was watching the object closely from the passenger window side. And then all of a sudden, while the witness driver said she became unresponsive in their conversation. So whatever they were doing or whatever was going on, all of a sudden she stopped doing this and appeared again like that state when the previous case, when they all saw it, it just somehow affected them. Anyway, the reporting witness, which was the driver, was frightened by the encounter. And so what she did, and we've seen this in other cases, she accelerated and she was going as fast as she can. She said in this particular case, it was 90 miles an hour. She was trying to, I guess, outrun it. The object then abruptly departed to the right toward the foothills at a speed beyond what is understood to be possible, making no sound. Again, we get this quick acceleration, right angle turns, and then, of course, no sound, and it disappears. Now, the interesting thing here is, as you'll see, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it, the after effects, which was reported from the witness driver, include fear, insomnia, obsession, physical sensations. The passenger, and I thought was pretty interesting, was never the same and or refused any further discussion about this particular incident. Now, we've seen this in many cases, and even in the case of the jackrabbit abduction enigma, the other witness experiencer in that, albeit she came forward and was part of the investigation, and I interacted with her to a certain extent, she never really wanted to say anything else about it, as has been in other cases. Anyway, so let's go on here. The object's behavior reported by the driver, it flew beside the witness vehicle on U.S. Highway 95. It remained close enough to travel alongside the Lincoln Continental, using the open area between the road and distant utility poles, as you'll see. It was larger than the vehicle, silent throughout the encounter, large lights, window-like features. It was disc-shaped. It kept pace with the vehicle, even though the driver drove fast and was upwards of 90 miles an hour. And, of course, the passenger fixated on the object as it was traveling next to them. So what I did, as you all know, is I asked AI, because I had no picture, no image, no drawing from any of the witnesses. And so this is a sort of a rendition created by AI of the object traveling right next to the car. And as you see there, they had the lights that the witness driver said, there's the power poles. And then you can see that particular area, like the last case, is very deserty. And it was flying right next to them, which I thought was incredibly scary, probably for the people who were seeing it. So, sort of a strange phenomenon. The silent disc flew directly beside the witness vehicle. Obviously, it was larger than it. Made no sound. I'm going to go on, but the bottom part here is the passenger witness. Her name was Glenda. Reported had her face fixed to the passenger window and didn't say anything. So her face was stuck to the window, and the witness believed that the passenger was engaged telepathically throughout the encounter. That's why she didn't say anything. This is what the driver said. And, one of the things that I remember is, and this is another picture of the Continental and then it passing in front of them. I imagine that, this probably scared both of them, obviously, based on the reports that they gave, but just the size and the movement. But, one of the things, and this is what the driver reported. So there was a number of effects that went on. The witness was curious but panicked during the event. Their hair was standing on end during the event. Body temperature changed during the event. So somehow there was this anomalous effect physically that she felt that there was some body temperature change, whether she was scared. There was a lot of shaking during the event. The driver said she was scared so much that she was uncontrollably almost shaking. She was hot. Her hair, like it said, standing up. After the event, the driver reported that she couldn't sleep. And it happened for a period of time after that. And that not only that, because of the reoccurringness of whatever was experiencing, there was sort of this obsession with the encounter. I don't know what happened during the time of the encounter. We can only assume that, again, as best that I can indicate, and we don't know, and I would like to probably follow up with her. She doesn't report any missing time, but there's enough of indications that there was a number of other things going on, this altered state. The witness reported, it was funny that her arm muscles were aching, and it could have been because she was tight on the steering wheel and that she felt rigid. The they were both, including the passenger, very fearful after, and they felt regret that the fear may have prevented a closer encounter. This is what they thought, and I don't. That's kind of strange. You would think all this fearfulness, but then one of the things she said during the interview with the original MUFON investigator is that she felt sort of a regret because her fear sort of spooked him away. I'm not sure that necessarily happened. The witness driver, said that her passenger was never the same, and again, continually refused any kind of contact. And then, of course, in the notes, and I thought this was pretty interesting, the driver suddenly after that had a great interest in the psychic phenomena. And so all the things that went on during this encounter, even years later, led to some additional, I guess, interactions or depth of contact, which is interesting as to what we find in these investigations. So you see these two cases. The first one on the 11th, of September, where the group of people who pulled over by St. George saw the objects and then some of the effects. And then this second one, which is a little bit south of St. George in Arizona, 4 days later, and the effects that happened there. And then we come to this case, and I'm not going to go into too depth of this case because I've done this case a number of times because it's my favorite case, and I was very blessed to be a part of it. But the case that I'm going to finally mention happened on the same day. It's called the Jackrabbit Abduction Enigma case. I received it. MUFON received it February 2023, and the date of the event was September 14th, 1978. That's when the two experiencers left, and then they traveled, and then their encounter happened later that night or into the next day, which was the 15th, in an area which is north of Cedar City, Utah. So obviously St. George is on the corner there, southwest corner as you enter Utah from Nevada. Cedar City is a little bit higher up on I-15. St. George is on I-15. Cedar City is just north of that. And so that's where our encounter of the Jackrabbit abduction occurred. And I bring it this way because it's part of our discussion on this flap. So a couple of just facts real quick, because it happened September 14th, 1978. It was about 9 p.m. ish. And this is when they stopped for gas just north of Cedar City, Utah. And then after the gas, after getting gas and recording in their trip book, Susan would tell me, the experiencer who reported it, that she recorded the information in their trip book because that's what they were doing, because they were taking a car across country during this trip that they made from San Diego en route to the other side, obviously to the East Coast. Anyway, they continued north on I-15. After passing an area called what we call Enoch, Utah, the passenger recalled, and again, the passenger being Susan, who reported seeing the moon rising in the east sky while she was talking to the driver who was Karen, her friend, and they both were. And Susan was thinking about jackrabbits from a previous encounter that she had. Anyway, 20 to 25 minutes later, this is what she estimated as they continued traveling north. Susan noticed that the moon was no longer visible, which was strange because she had just seen it. It was a clear night, and why wasn't the moon visible anymore? And then there was this large dark shadow appeared over their car when she realized that the moon wasn't visible anymore, and then there was a shadow over the car. They soon, as the car is driving and all this is occurring, both her and the driver, there was numerous jackrabbits gathered in the roadway up ahead. And the driver, who was Karen, stopped the car in the middle of the roadway all of a sudden, of course, which surprised Susan. Why don't you just pull over to the side of the road? But no, she stopped in the middle of the roadway. So it appeared, based on what I could determine, is this effect had already began to take place back when Susan noticed that the moon was not there anymore. And then there was a black object. And then all of a sudden, the noise and different things started occurring. And as you'll see here, once they stopped the car in the middle of the road, both the passenger and the driver, Susan and Karen, got out of the car, walked to the front of the car, the vehicle, and they described that the moment as being sort of strange and dreamlike. Again, this altered state, similar to our first case, and then the second one that we did with the two ladies in La Paz County, while the moon obviously was still not there. Now, the jackrabbits at that particular point, according to Susan and what we learned from Karen, started to turn around toward them. So they were facing him. There was a bunch of them in the road, and they started turning around. And once they turned around, they changed from jackrabbits into what I learned were small gray humanoid beings, when a pure white light descending from the above of both of the passenger and the driver. And of course, they blacked out at that particular point, and then our abduction event occurred. So again, one of the things that in the course of investigating, I had Susan draw what she remembered. So I want to tell you that it was like 35 plus years later and you'll see there when she finally remembered, and it was revealed, which happens consistently with abduction and experiences that happen when you're very young, and then you somehow, either they're screen memories or they're put away or they're put in a closet in our mind, and we forget about it. But she remembered it. But this picture was created in 2023, and after all those years, and this is what she remembered. As you can see, the terrain is consistent with what I had shown you in the previous two cases of that area. And there's jackrabbits in there, and that's the car they were driving, and they got out and they went in front. And then the irony of it is what she remembers is, and this is a drawing that she did, what she remembers is it was black, dark. She really didn't see what was above her because the light was bright, but it had blacked out the moon, and it came down. And then all of a sudden, the jackrabbits that were in the roadway, when they turned around and began facing them, Susan saw that they were no longer rabbits, but they were these 3.5 foot beings that she characterizes, as you can see there, which are the common gray beings. And then all of a sudden, this pulling up from this light that shined down, turned the car off, turned the radio off. They were listening to Dr. Wu, I believe they said, I don't know if it was Pink Floyd or whoever it is, Dr. Wu musicians are. And then obviously the sound stopped, the light, and then they, of course, blacked out. Again, incredible case. Just a couple of other things I want to say about that case, and I had said this before, but it's a very important. Again, this case, like I believe the La Paz case, and maybe even a certain amount of the case that happened around St. George, there's this missing time, or how time either stops or gets suspended, or like when we dream or when we daydream or when we float off, it changes. In this particular case, Susan and Karen, once they blacked out, they didn't remember anything, and it took about 9 hours later they woke up. So whether it was 9:30, 10 o'clock, 10:30 at nighttime, when the encounter of the ship occurred, and when they woke up again, it was 9 hours later. As best they can remember, they were in Grand Junction, Colorado. It said 377, but it's probably more like 400 miles away east. They don't remember any of the recollection of the travel. The interesting thing, as I told you, when they were stopped in Cedar City, and they recorded their gas and mileage. They recorded the mileage on the car and the gas in the car. After they woke up in Grand Junction 9 hours later, and actually it was a day later after that, because after they woke up, they actually slept at a nearby motel, recovering from being abducted. It was almost 24 hours later. But when they checked their trip book, it was a AAA trip book, the miles were the same and the gas level was the same in the car as it was in Cedar City. So obviously the assumption is that whatever abducted her and her driver, Karen, also abducted the car, which has happened many times. And again, there's a lot of physical and psychological effects as related to the abduction that occurred: nausea, vomiting, confusion, disorientation. There was burn marks, as Susan talked about their body, and there was pictures that she sent of that trip that when I did the case here recently, indicated obviously that both of them that were under stress. A lot of smell on their clothes. A lot of the people who do experience abductions and are around non-human intelligence or in ships have a tendency to characterize the smell: sulfur, rotten eggs, dirty, moist. The effects that they had from that abduction lasted a long time. And there was a lot of this. And this is where one of the things I thought was significant, and it happened in many of the cases, because that's why I think a lot of people don't report it till late. But the symptoms, the trauma is characteristically similar to PTSD, as we see in people who've experienced significant emotional and physical events, war, accidents, traumas, or seeing things that breaks their perception, their paradigm, and sometimes causes them to not be able to process it. And so these symptoms are consistent with that. So just a couple of things, because I think it's interesting, because the ship encounter, Susan, later in 2022, finally, for some reason, we see this, that something clicks and their memory starts to unwind and the doors start to open in their mind and subconscious. And all of a sudden she is thinking about UFOs and abduction, and she goes online and it triggers, and that's what we call them, triggers. And a lot of people who do counseling understand that with the way people who deal with trauma. But anyway, the trigger led to discovery of an alien abduction movie. It's called The Alien Abduction Answers documentary by John Yost. Great movie. And of course, that led to the primary witness, Susan, to seek investigators or researchers, which MUFON was the organization that they reached out. Besides, they also reached out to a great ufology investigator, researcher, Preston Dennett, who did a great job on that particular case. But actually, it led to a hypnotic regression. And then, of course, details emerged. One of the things I thought was interesting, and I wanted to make sure that I shared it with you, that obviously, when she blacked out, her and Karen, they don't remember much until this regression that happened almost 35, 36 years later. But they remember floating up into the craft. Susan remembers the interior of the craft was rounded. It was edgeless. The whole time that she remembered, based on the regression, it was sort of holographic, or not dreamlike, misty-like in the appearance. There was non-human entities in there. They did communicate with Susan. They did comfort her and say Karen was there, but she was all right. Susan asked to touch one of them, his arm, because it was wrinkly, and she did. In her mind, she says, "Ooh, wrinkly." And of course, telepathically, Susan said that the entity said, "Well, why are you saying ooh? It's you that you're touching." Again, with this reference there, you were there, you are them. And then there was a number of medical procedures that continued throughout Susan's life, and some of it was medical healing, and some of it related to other things that happen in her life besides the development of psychic abilities. And then, of course, we were able to go back to her childhood, and then there was some precursor behaviors and encounters that happened with a lot of people who experienced abduction. In all these three cases, which is an interesting thing, and I want to make sure that I explain it before I go on, just to let you all know, that's the emblem that starts our show. That's the rabbit and alien that I created based on Susan's testimony that I use as a mantra, because it was an incredible case, and it was the jackrabbits that turned into the grays. But so let's talk a little bit about this for a second. These cases are very significant. This flap that happened, when we get these abduction cases, and the Susan Jackrabbit abduction enigma cases, and we go and start doing our background check, and then all of a sudden our records reveal, and other reporting bodies and organizations have also have reports from that particular same September of 1978. But I used our records, and of course those are just a small smidgen of people, and these are only just a couple of people reported. But think about it. That's we know in this particular field that nobody reports encounters or sightings. If they do, they're very little. And of course, what they do report, are just a small tip. But just imagine the people who were there at St. George seeing that object on that day on September 11th, 1978, and what they experienced. And then the two ladies in La Paz County who either earlier than Susan's abductions or right after or during, we don't know, in the same area, not too far from Cedar City in Arizona, on that same highway that leads to the same street. They had their own experience, and we don't know if it was missing time. But again, and then Susan and Karen's abduction experience in the Jackrabbit abduction enigma, all three of these happened at the same general time within 4 days, and are multiple experiences with multiple witnesses, multiple experiencers, and they give credence to this phenomena and what we're trying to investigate and share with others as to we are more than we really realize. And so I thought this was a great look at a flap and the three cases that were involved and how they all sort of corroborate the other. Because, what's the likelihood of these same type of events, same type of experiences, same type of objects, same type of descriptiveness about them and others, and then the psychological, physiological, emotional effects that happen, and then years later when they're reporting. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, because I really enjoyed looking at it, and I continue talking to Susan. We finally met recently at Contact in the Desert when she gave my wife and I tickets for the day there, and I really had a good time in Indian Wells and in the desert near Palm Springs, and it was nice to finally meet her. So again, very cool. What I would like to do is share with all you guys that some closing thoughts. But before I do that, I want to make sure that, listen, if you have an experience and you want to share it, I would really like to hear it. Both MUFON and I would love to hear it. So if you've had a similar experience, similar sightings, if you know about this 1978 flap, or you have your own experience during that time, you can reach out to me. My email is MUFON, MUFON, INV, it stands for investigator, BAN, Banasek. So it's MUFON, INV, BAN at AOL.com. I really would like to hear from you. And as always, and you'll see here in this, because it's important that I want to share this, because this is the whole purpose of our show. When I say we are the phenomenon, we are the phenomenon. And all these things that we experience are sort of under what we are experiencing, and it leads to this whole idea about these three questions that I always ask. Who am I? Why am I here? And where did I come from? And the answer to these is you are who you are looking for. So you are who you're looking for. So trust yourself. You don't need anybody else to tell you these things. Trust yourself and believe who you are. And again, like all of it, thank you for coming. I wish you the best. Take care and have a good day. Bye.